The first thing I noticed was a hairline fracture in the load-bearing weld on the third-floor curtain wall bracket. It was maybe 3 inches long. You'd miss it if you weren't looking for it. I was looking for it because that's what I do. I look at the things nobody else wants to look at, and I tell the truth about what I see. My name is Cole Hawkins. I'm 41 years old. I'm a structural inspector for commercial construction sites in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I drive a 2017 F-150 with a cracked dashboard and a car seat in the back that my daughter Junebug. Her real name is June, but she's been Junebug since she was 3 days old. Has outgrown, but I keep there because I'm not ready to take it out yet. She's 8 now. It's just the two of us. Has been since she was 4. That's the part people always want to know about first, the single dad thing. I get it. It sounds like a story. And it is, I guess. But it's not the story I'm here to tell. The story I'm here to tell started on a Tuesday in February, on the 47th floor of a glass tower going up on the north edge of downtown Dallas, when I found a crack that someone very powerful needed me to pretend I hadn't found. I'd been on the Voss Tower project for about 6 weeks when it happened. It was a prestige job. Everybody knew it. 49 floors, all glass and poured concrete, the kind of building that ends up on magazine covers and in architecture school slideshows. The developer was a woman named Helena Crane. If you're from Dallas, you know that name. If you're not, here's what you need to know. Helena Crane was 53 years old, worth somewhere north of $2.4 billion, and had built or acquired more commercial real estate in North Texas than anyone since the 80s. She didn't come to the job site often. When she did, everyone straightened up like a general had walked in. I was contracted through Meridian Inspection Services, a third-party firm, the project's general contractor. A company called Halston Build had brought in to satisfy the city's independent review requirements. My job was simple on paper: walk the structure, document what I find, sign off when it's safe, flag it when it isn't. In practice, on a job this size, with this many eyes on the timeline, the pressure to sign off was constant. Not aggressive usually, just atmospheric. Like the air on site was slightly thicker than normal. I didn't mind it. I'd been doing this 14 years. I know the difference between a pressure headache and a real problem. The bracket I found on a Tuesday morning was a real problem. It was part of the curtain wall attachment system on the building's northeast face, 3rd floor up from the mechanical level. Curtain wall is the exterior glass and panel skin that hangs off the structural frame. On a building like Voss Tower, the loads those brackets carry, wind, dead weight, thermal expansion, are enormous and constantly cycling. A compromised weld on one of those attachments isn't a cosmetic issue. It's a failure point. And failure at that location, given the geometry of the load path, could initiate a progressive collapse of the exterior cladding system across multiple floors. I'm saying this plainly because I want you to understand what I was looking at. I wasn't being overly cautious. I wasn't misreading the specs. I had the structural drawings on my tablet. I had my gauge. I had 14 years of standing in front of exactly this kind of detail. And what I was looking at was a weld that had not been completed to spec and had already begun to fail under the loads it had been carrying for the past 8 weeks of construction. I photographed it. I documented it in my field log. And I walked downstairs to find the project superintendent, a man named Barry who I'd gotten along fine with for 6 weeks, and I told him what I found. Barry looked at my photos. He looked at them for a long time. "How confident are you?" he said. "Completely," I said. He nodded slowly. "Let me make a call." That should have been my first signal that this was going to go sideways. When a super says, "Let me make a call," instead of "let me get eyes on it," the call isn't to an engineer. I waited 40 minutes in the site trailer. There was a folding table with a box of Krispy Kreme donuts that had been there long enough to go stiff. I drank bad coffee from a machine in the corner and looked at my photos again. I wasn't second-guessing myself. I was just waiting. Barry came back in with 2 other men I recognized: Donovan Price, Halston's project manager, and a man I'd seen once before on site who I later learned was Helena Crane's personal construction advisor, a former structural engineer named Gerald Sato. Gerald was maybe 60, tan, silver-haired, and wore the kind of calm expression that usually means either deep competence or deep practice at not revealing what he's thinking. Donovan spoke first. "Cole, walk me through what you've got." I did. I pulled up the photos. I pulled up the relevant spec page from the drawings. I walked them through the load path analysis I'd done on my tablet in the last 40 minutes, and I showed them the gap between what the weld was supposed to be and what it was. Gerald looked at the photos. He looked at them longer than Barry had. "The weld toe is suboptimal," he said. "I'm not sure it rises to the level of a formal flag." I looked at him. "The weld is incomplete at the root, on a cyclically loaded bracket under a curtain wall system with this much area. I'm sure there's interpretive range in the tolerance spec," he said. "I don't think there is," I said. "Not here." Donovan cleared his throat. "Cole, look. The inspection window for this phase closes Friday. We're already behind. Miss Crane is very invested in the timeline, M's." "Crane's timeline doesn't change what the weld looks like," I said. Nobody said anything for a second. Then Donovan said, "Can you give us a day? Let us bring in our own structural consultant before you file?" I looked at him. "You can bring in whoever you want. My findings go into the system today." Donovan's face did something I recognized. It was the look people get when they realize the conversation they thought they were having is not the one that's actually happening. He excused himself to make another call. Helena Crane arrived on site the next morning at 7:45. I know that sounds like maybe she was already planning to be there. She wasn't. I found out later she'd flown in from a board meeting in Houston specifically because of my flag. I was on the 3rd floor, re-photographing the bracket from a different angle, when I heard heels on the concrete behind me. That sound doesn't usually happen on a construction site. I turned around. Helena Crane was about 5'6", with dark hair pulled back, wearing a cream-colored coat over a charcoal blazer. She had the kind of face that had probably always been striking, and had only gotten more particular with age. She wasn't alone. Gerald Sato was behind her, and Donovan, and 2 other men I didn't know. But she walked ahead of all of them, and when she stopped about 4 feet away from me, close enough that it was clearly intentional. "You're Cole Hawkins," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Helena." She didn't offer a hand. She looked at the bracket on the wall, then back at me. "Tell me what you see." I told her. Same as I'd told the others, but cleaner, because I'd had a day to organize it. She listened without interrupting, which surprised me. She had the posture of someone who was used to being the smartest person in the room, but she was listening. When I finished, she said, "What's your background?" 14 years structural inspection. Before that, 4 years ironwork, mostly commercial. Associate's degree in construction technology from Tarrant County College. Do you have a PE? A professional engineer's license? "No, ma'am. That's not required for my certification level." She nodded. "Gerald has a PE. Gerald has 30 years of structural engineering experience. Gerald looked at the same bracket you looked at and came to a different conclusion." I looked at Gerald. Gerald was looking at a spot on the floor. "I understand that," I said, "and Gerald may well be right. I'm not a PE, but I'm the independent inspector on this job, and what I see is what I'm required to document. If there's disagreement, the process is to get a second independent opinion, not to ask me to hold my findings." Helena Crane looked at me for a long moment, and then she said something I will remember for the rest of my life. She said it quietly, without any visible anger, which somehow made it land harder. "Mr. Hawkins, this building, when it opens, will be a commercial flagship that generates roughly $14 million in annual lease revenue. Every week we're delayed in this inspection phase costs the project approximately $380,000 in financing and carrying costs. I have 47 units that are 90% pre-leased to tenants who have contractual penalty clauses if we miss delivery, and I have the ability to make or break the professional reputation of any inspection firm in North Texas." She paused. "I also have the ability to make the careers of people who treat my projects with appropriate flexibility. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" I did. I understood exactly what she was saying to me. I thought about June for a second. She's 8. She likes butterflies and hates thunderstorms, and makes me cut the crust off her sandwiches, even though she's old enough to do it herself, and I do it every single time because I know one day she'll stop asking me to, and I'm not ready for that either. I thought about the mortgage on our house in Haltom City, the $1,847s I paid every month that was about 40% of my take-home. I thought about the fact that Meridian Inspection Services might not be happy about what comes next. I thought about all of that for maybe 3 seconds. Then I said, "Mems, Crane Helena, I understand exactly what you're saying. And I respect how clearly you said it. My report is in the city system. I documented the bracket at 7:20 this morning. If your structural consultant wants to contest my findings through the formal appeals process, that channel is available. But I can't unfile what I filed, and I wouldn't if I could. The site was very quiet. Somewhere below us, a nail gun was firing in a steady rhythm, and then it stopped, and there was just the wind coming off the north face of the building. Helena looked at me for a long time. Then she turned and walked back toward the elevator bank without saying anything. Gerald Sato followed her. Donovan looked at me with an expression that was something between sympathy and irritation, and then he followed too. I turned back to the bracket. The next 2 weeks were ugly in the way that quiet things are ugly. Meridian's owner, a man named Bart, called me the day my report cleared the city review queue and asked me, very carefully, whether I had fully considered the stakeholder implications of a flag of this nature on a project of this profile. I told him I had. He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "Okay, Cole," and hung up. 2 days later, I found out through a colleague that Meridian had been informally removed from consideration for a large commercial project Helena Crane's company had in development in Frisco. A project worth, by most estimates, about $2.5 million in inspection contracts over 3 years. Donovan Price stopped returning my texts about scheduling. I was still on the job, technically, but I could feel the edges of my access starting to contract. Little things. Site badges taking longer to scan. Coffee that used to appear in the trailer not appearing anymore. The city sent an independent structural engineer named Dr. Rafaela Okonkwo to review the bracket. Dr. Okonkwo had a Ph.D. from UT Austin and had spent 12 years at the Texas Department of Transportation reviewing bridge structures before going private. She spent about 90 minutes at the bracket. She filed her report on a Thursday. She agreed with me. Not in the theatrical way that would have made for a better story. Just clinically, technically, completely. The weld was non-conforming. The bracket required remediation before the curtain wall system could proceed. She also noted in a single sentence in the appendix of her report that the weld had likely been installed by a subcontractor whose certification had lapsed and whose recertification paperwork had been processed in a way that created ambiguity about the coverage dates. That sentence was the one that mattered, because it meant this wasn't an anomaly or an oversight. Someone had approved a subcontractor who shouldn't have been on the job, and somewhere in the paper trail there was either negligence or a decision. Those are two different things, and one of them is a lot worse than the other. The project was shut down for 11 days. I heard about the shutdown through the industry grapevine, which in DFW construction is extremely efficient. 11 days. The remediation required cutting out the non-conforming weld, prepping the base metal, re-welding by a certified welder under third-party observation, and re-inspecting both the repaired bracket and the 12 adjacent brackets in the same installation sequence. Because if one substandard weld existed, the probability of others in that run was not negligible. They found 2 more. One was borderline. Could have been argued either way, and Halston chose to remediate it anyway, which I thought was the right call. One was clear. 3 brackets total, out of a curtain wall system that, when complete, would hold approximately 84,000 square feet of glass and panel on a 49-floor building in downtown Dallas where, on a busy weekday, several thousand people would be walking, working, and moving in and out at street level. I don't want to be dramatic about this. I want to be accurate. The brackets might have held. The weld might have performed adequately under the actual loads it would have encountered, which don't always equal the theoretical maximum. Construction tolerances and safety factors are built specifically to account for variability. It might have been fine, but it also might not have been fine. And the way I was raised, and the way I've come to understand this work over 14 years, is that might have been fine is not the standard. The standard is the standard, and it exists for a reason, and my job is to hold to it regardless of what it costs somebody's timeline. Bart at Meridian didn't fire me. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I turned out to be right, and the optics of firing a vindicated inspector were worse than whatever else he was worried about. Maybe because he's a better man than I sometimes credit him for being. He called me about 3 weeks after the shutdown, after everything had been resolved and the project was back underway, and he said, "You know this is going to follow you." "I know," I said. "Okay," he said. Good work. That was it. Helena Crane never called me. I didn't expect her to. People like Helena Crane operate in a world where they rarely have to reckon directly with the moments where someone said no to them and turned out to be right. The system does the reckoning for them in 11-day shutdowns and remediation costs and insurance implications and quiet conversations in boardrooms that I'll never be in. I'm sure she moved on quickly. I'm sure she was in another boardroom the next morning thinking about another building. That's fine. That's not what I was there for. What I want to tell you about, because it's the part I still think about at night sometimes, happened on a Friday evening about 5 weeks after the inspection. I was home. It was past 6, and June was at the kitchen table doing second-grade math homework, which at that age consists of things like, if Aiden has 7 apples and gives 3 to Kylie, how many does Aiden have? But which she treats with the focus of someone diffusing a device. She had her pencil in her fist the way she does, pressing hard enough to nearly tear the paper. I was making spaghetti, the only thing I make reliably well, the kind with the Italian sausage from the H-E-B on Beach Street, the jar sauce that I add real garlic and crushed red pepper to, because I'm not willing to do it completely from scratch, but I'm also not willing to just open a jar and call it done. That's kind of my whole approach to most things, actually. My phone buzzed on the counter, a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I picked it up. The voice on the other end was a woman's. Not Helena Crane. Someone younger, professional, slightly hesitant. She said her name was Adrienne, and she worked for the city's Department of Building Inspection. She said she was calling because Dr. Okonkwo had included my name in her report in a specific way, noting that my initial flag had been filed promptly and had held up completely under independent review, and that the department was updating its approved inspector list, and they wanted to know if Meridian Inspection Services, and specifically I, would be willing to be considered for the department's Verified Inspector program. I don't know if that means anything to you. It didn't mean anything to me at first. Adrienne explained it. The Verified Inspector program was a relatively new initiative where the city maintained a short list of third-party inspectors who had demonstrated a specific standard of documentation quality and professional independence and who would be referred to projects where the city had concerns about potential conflicts of interest between the developer and their contracted inspection services. In plain English, they wanted to put me on the list of people the city calls when they think someone might be trying to put their thumb on the scale. It wouldn't change your day-to-day much, Adrienne said. It's more of a designation, but it does come with a modest annual retainer from the department. How modest? I said. Because I have a daughter and a mortgage, she told me. It wasn't going to change my life, but it was real money, and it was the city, and it meant something I didn't have a word for yet. Okay, I said. Yes, I'd be interested. I hung up. June looked up from her homework. Who was that? City, I said. What did they want? I thought about how to explain it to an 8-year-old. You know how sometimes at school, when someone's doing something they're not supposed to, the teacher asks you to tell them what you saw. She nodded. It's kind of like that, except it's for buildings. She considered this for a moment with the extremely serious expression she has when she's actually processing something, the one where her nose wrinkles slightly on the left side. So you're like a tattletale, she said. I laughed. I laughed harder than I'd laughed in probably a month. Yeah, baby, I said. I'm like a tattletale. She seemed satisfied with this and went back to her apples and Aiden's. I went back to the spaghetti. I've thought a lot since then about what that moment on the 47th floor actually cost. Not me, specifically, about what it actually cost everyone. It cost Helena Crane 11 days and probably several $1 million in remediation and delay, in addition to the reputational damage of having a code deficiency become a matter of public record on what was supposed to be a flagship project. It cost the subcontractor their certification, and likely their contract, and probably their business. It cost Bart at Meridian one large future contract. It may have contributed to Donovan Price parting ways with Halston. I heard something about that, though I don't know the details. And it cost me, too. I know that. The months after were quieter than they should have been. Fewer referrals. Some jobs I probably didn't get because word travels. And not everyone wants the inspector who'll file a report that shuts down a high-profile project in the middle of a timeline crunch. That's real. That has a dollar amount attached to it that I could probably calculate if I wanted to sit down and do it, and I don't want to sit down and do it. What I know is that 3 brackets got fixed on a building in downtown Dallas where several thousand people go to work every day. That's what I know. The rest is noise. I want to say one more thing, because I've watched enough videos like this to know that the temptation, at the end, is to wrap it up with a bow, to deliver some clean summation about integrity and doing the right thing that makes the whole story feel like it was building toward a lesson. I don't have a lesson, exactly. I have something more like an observation. There was a moment on that floor when Helena Crane was looking at me, and I was thinking about June and the mortgage and the car seat I still haven't taken out of the back of my truck. In that moment, the temptation wasn't to do the wrong thing because I'm a coward. The temptation was to find a reason why the wrong thing was actually fine. To locate some ambiguity, and there's almost always some ambiguity, if you look hard enough, and park yourself in it and tell yourself you were just being reasonable. I have seen that happen to good people, smart people, people who got into this work because they cared about it. The ambiguity is always there if you want to find it, and the pressure is always there to want to find it. And over time, that combination does something to you that I think is very hard to undo. I just didn't want that to be done to me. That's really the whole story. June got every one of her math problems right that night. She showed me, before bed, all the little circles and checks her teacher had put next to each answer, and she was so proud she could barely stand still. I told her she was the smartest kid I knew. She said, "I know, Dad. I cut the crust off her toast the next morning. I'll keep doing it for as long as she lets me."